The work session of the Oregon City Commission to order for Tuesday, March 10th, 5:30. So let's do the roll call.
Commissioner Shaw.
Commissioner Shaw is going to be late.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner West.
Here.
Commissioner Pauly.
Here.
And Mayor Holliday.
Here. So we have future agenda items. Commission's adopted goals and available staff resources shall be considered when recommending future agenda items. Commission may add an item to future agenda with the consensus of the commission. Does anybody have any future agenda items they wish to talk about today? Hearing none, we'll move on. Discussion items. 3A, 15-150, city naming policy. This is for Maureen Cole, Library Director.
Good evening, Commissioners. So this came up because the Library Foundation is starting its capital campaign. And in capital campaigns, most of them, people are given opportunities to name things in exchange for donations of certain sizes. So what we started looking to city policy because we wanted to be in alignment with city policy, and we found that the naming policy that was being used here was only being used by the Parks Department for naming of parks and cemeteries, which was appropriate because that's all that has been named up until this point. And so what we discussed doing was creating a naming policy that would encompass other naming opportunities, such as ones for donations, and create a policy that would be more of a template for each department as things came up. So I worked with Mr. Kabizman to create a more generic policy that encompassed more naming options, and that would encompass the options that were already being used by the Parks Department of the cemeteries and the parks. And so what you have before you is that draft policy, and we'd like to get your input on that. We wanted you to know about it just in case, first of all, that if it ever came up, that somebody would say, hey, what's going on in the library? They're naming things. What's that all about? We wanted to be sure that you knew that there was a policy and that whatever we do at the library would be in accordance with this policy. And so we thought you might have some ideas about this policy. You might be able to give us some good feedback on it. And then we were hoping just to proceed with this at a staff level. So I changed one thing, which is under the where is this? Under the honorific naming on page 3. And I just noted that into specific guidelines, Mr. Kabizman had recommended that we create specific guidelines for this, and I changed that sentence to say that those guidelines will be developed by staff, and that's what would go in this policy, and then they would be attached as those are developed. So I have copies of that with that change if you want to see that, but that's the only thing I've changed since what I sent out. David, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, this was taken out in part from what they've been doing in the Community Services Department. Scott, can you, has the policy been working pretty well for you over the years in your department? No real problems that you can think of that have happened? I think we're in a good we have a good opportunity here at the library for folks who want to donate, and be recognized. And some want to donate and don't want to be recognized at all.
Right.
And we'd like to accommodate both of those. But for folks that are willing to be recognized, it's a nice way for us to thank them. But we did need some kind of guidelines, and we have a draft here that we think is a real workable one. But we wanted to make sure that the commission was supportive of the policy before we started doing it.
Discussion?
I don't know if anybody else has anything more to add.
Questions?
Daphne's on that.
Oh, sorry, I was on the other.
So there was
Daphne.
thank you. So there was a couple things. So one, I thought there is no dollar amount. So
Right.
does it cost $5,000 to name City Hall after yourself, or $10 million?
Right.
So you and then so that was one thing. So that there was kind of ambiguous on So I know we were thinking about the room at the library or collections, and I don't know if this policy is just broad enough to cover it all, but the bottom line is that commission decides the city building or facility will be named upon commission approval on that one specific city building. Is that kind of where we're going with this? So two things, the vagueness and the numbers, and then who makes the final decision?
Well, the charter provides the city manager with the authority to manage all public facilities. I don't know that encompasses naming them. And so that's why I told Mo, I said I'd like to bring this to the commission and make sure that you're comfortable with the policy, because we will be the ones that implement it ultimately. You probably don't want, every time we're going to do a park bench, you probably don't want the privilege of overseeing that administrative function, is my guess. But of course, if you did, I'm happy to oblige. But I think the intent here was to have a discussion about the overall policy and the direction of it. And maybe we could talk about some hypotheticals, Maureen, that you think will apply, and point out a couple of the provisions in the policy and how they would work to make you more comfortable.
Yeah, and as far as dollar amount,
Yeah.
I mean, we were floating some amounts in the Library Foundation meetings to just kind of like, okay, so is the children's room worth $50,000?
Right.
It's a big deal in the scope of the library, so what would that be worth to us dollar-wise, But I think we wrote this so that there would be flexibility amongst the department, so that there's not individual prices listed, that would be something that would be going on according to what the activity was in that department, because each building or each whatever, would be a little bit unique and individual. So, and as far as coming back to the commission, as David said, we could bring anything back to you. There would be a certain amount of freedom that would be helpful when you're saying to a possible donor that, if you do this, then we could put your name on something,
Right.
Without having to come back to you and say, well, now we have a donor, could we do this? So what I could also do is, as it gets more specific, we could give you like a schedule and say, $50,000 for a children's room, does that like sit well with you? And then whatever the group is, then we could use that name. But yeah, we were looking at, for instance, the children's room, the atrium, but also like, let's say, the David Frazier decides that he's going to buy $50,000 worth of children's room, and it might be the Frazier Children's Room. But then maybe inside we have the West Story Corner. I'm just saying, it's a
got
great
lots of them.
idea, right? And then we have the Poly Teen Room, or something like that, So
I'll
it
take
could
a
be.
chair. I'll take a chair.
Okay, I'll take a chair. Well, that's more than that.
Books, maybe.
So, it could be big things, but it also could be smaller things because,
Yeah, right.
And I mean, we would also do it so that, this is really important, so that it didn't just look like we had names everywhere. I mean, it would be in alignment with the signage that we had at the library. It wouldn't be so these things would just be jumping out at you all over the place.
Yeah.
And, but, libraries have kind of gotten into the area of like, corporate naming or business naming. Like, if, let's say, Bench Press, or that's what it's called, right?
Benchmade.
Benchmade.
I'm sorry, Bench Press.
Careful.
I knew there was something. Let's just say they really believed in this library and really wanted to be sure that literacy was at the foremost of, all of their workers' families who lived in Oregon City. Well, if they wanted to name something, we would certainly be happy to take their donation and do that. And that would be appropriate for this community. So those are the kinds of things we started talking about, and we just wanted to make sure the piece was in place before we go out there and make any kind of suggestion to any donor that this could happen. We wanted to be all on the same page to start with.
Well, it does say a city facility or a building, so it didn't say like
Yeah.
every little park bench and.
I think
Thank you, Maureen.
Sure.
I think I would be a little more comfortable, with us delineating anything below the naming of an entire facility or an entire building could be done by staff. But if we're going to name City Hall or the police station or, a park,
Okay.
something like that, I think that needs to be at the commission level.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
So building and parks being accepted, does the policy otherwise appear sound to you?
Yeah,
Okay.
to me it did anyway.
And I assume that we'll have, that there'll be some communication with the commission on that stuff as it comes along, right?
Right, and we would actually take that direction tonight and write that into this policy too, so that it was clear that if it was a building or a park, that,
It would be, come before you.
yeah. So we
Yeah.
can put that in this policy
Yes.
too,
Park
so it makes it
plaza.
clear. Yeah.
I think facility covers, a park is a facility, right?
Well, we need to define what we mean by facility, but because it could be,
So we got to give Bill some more money. I see.
We'll review what,
we know what
Staff comes up, yeah.
want. You basically
Right.
mean land, significant lands or buildings.
Yeah, but I mean, if
being
we're talking about, benches or a room at the library, I think that's stuff that can be done at staff level, and,
Okay.
and you guys are negotiating that stuff, so you have the best, you're closest to it, so you best know the value that might bring, and I assume you're going to discuss that with the library board as well.
That would be appropriate, yes. They haven't seen this, but they'll see it tomorrow at the meeting, our monthly meeting. So
Okay.
this is something we can talk about further with them.
And then if they have any concerns, we can talk about it when it comes out in the regular
Absolutely.
commission session.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Good.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you very much.
Moving on. PC 15159, the Oregon City Sign Code Update. Planning file L1401. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Evening, Commissioners. On February 10th, at the February 10th, 2015 work session, staff provided an update on the sign code language itself. There were a couple of questions from that work session, including the art committee and murals, the number of A-frames, specifically if there should be allowed more than one per tax lot, more related to number of business entrances or another way to measure those, and then what would be the maximum allowed. Then the content of signs placed in the right-of-way, specifically banners. And so we did provide in our packet outlined those issues. Laura will work through those as we continue the work session here. And then also there's a memo in there from our attorney concerning the content neutrality and what limitations we have when it comes to regulating content if we are going to go down that road of allowing that within the city. And then we also wanted to, what we're also hoping to do was kind of outline the public engagement process, the enforcement process. We also have information in there concerning fees and whatnot that we'll try to walk through as quickly as we can here tonight. So with that, unless there are any questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Turway to go ahead and give the presentation.
Good evening. Laura Turway. I'm a planner with the City of Oregon City. So as you know, it was one of the commission goals to review our signage standards in Oregon City. So how many signs can one have on their property or in the right-of-way? How big can those signs be, and what are those materials? So we took a look at our code, and we started a robust public involvement policy and plan. Let's see, it's coming through there slowly. With the community engagement plan, we met with anyone that was willing to listen to us. We met with all neighborhood associations, downtown Oregon City, Business Alliance, anyone who would listen to us. And from that, we created a community advisory team, which was sat with 7 appointed positions to represent a variety of interests in signage in Oregon City. So there were some citizens, there were also representatives of the signage community and so forth. That group met 5 times and had a community open house, and from that they created draft signage standards. The city has taken those signage standards and actually written code language for them. With that code language, it's been before our planning commission, and now it's before you. We did mail notices to all property owners within the urban growth boundaries. Over 10,500 of those went out with that. So as Tony discussed, there's a lot on the agenda for tonight's meeting, so I will be, yes.
Just want to let the record reflect that Commissioner Shaw has joined the meeting.
So I will be brief while we address each agenda item. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask while we're going through that before we move on to the next topic. We're going to start with those 3 questions which were left over from the last City Commission work session. The first question is, should we allow signs within the right-of-way? As Mr. Conkle referenced, we had our city attorney write a memorandum looking at the requirements for signs in the right-of-way and if there was any way that the city could distinguish between events or advertisement, and there is not. So knowing that we have to be content neutral, would we still like to have signs within the right-of-way? Our current sign code allows cross-street banners, banners on streetlight poles, and then A-frame signs on the ground. So
Are you asking a question?
that is a question, yes.
Well,
Sorry
why don't
about that.
Why don't we
big
just-
question.
Why don't we just list the questions and we can talk about them all at the end?
Okay, so so there's only 3. The second question is, if we do want to allow signs in the right-of-way and A-frame sounds on the ground on the right-of-way, say, for example, in a sidewalk or something like that, how many do we want to allow? So last time we talked to you, we had 1 per property frontage. So most properties would get 1. If you were on a corner, you could get 1 on each side. We came up with an option number 2, which mimics parts of Grants Pass in the city of Portland, where we look at the number of public entrances. So if you have multiple public entrances, you may be able to have multiple signs on the right-of-way. You would have no more than 3 on each side, though, so there would be a limit to that.
And this would just be in the mixed-use downtown zone.
That would just be in the mixed-use downtown zone. The mixed-use downtown zone is a majority of the bottom shelf of the city. So everywhere else up the hill and the top of the hill would be 1 per frontage.
Would that include the multimodal mixed-use zone?
For Blue Heron, for the Willamette Falls area?
It's the only place we have
we could-
multimodal mixed-use zoning, right?
Well, that designation encompasses a larger area, but the
Okay.
Willamette Falls the Willamette Falls district, we would have to include, yes, we would include that in the mixed-use downtown zone.
Thank you.
And the third and final question is, again, knowing that we have to be content neutral, should we allow public art murals? So we can't have requirements that say the murals have to be historically appropriate or anything like that, or that it's not advertisement. We do have some requirements in there that if we do allow public art murals, which are essentially large wall signs that exceed our wall sign standards, that be in a public easement, that be dedicated to the city for 5 years, the image can't change for 5 years, and that there's no compensation given or received for the mural. So, but we can't really get at the content part of it. So those are the 3 questions for the commission. Moving forward, I just want to tell you what we're going to do, or what our plan is for how we're going to implement this sign code. And we're going to start with an aggressive public engagement plan. And if you have any comments for me, let me know, and we can certainly add it. We want to do an intensive level outreach once we adopt the code. So maybe it's effective 6 months later, and we do some type of public engagement for 6 months until it's actually effective after we adopted it. We can do press releases, notice in our water bills. There's over 10,500 water bills that go out to residential and commercial customers in the city. We would do mailed notices to everyone within a non-residential zoning designation, so businesses and so forth. Articles in Trail News, meeting with the CIC, anything and everything that we could think of, posters around town, we will do. And our theory is that people will hear it multiple times, so they'll get familiar with our sign code, or at least remember that we do have a different sign code, and they'll start to self-regulate. Maybe they'll become familiar with it if they're a business owner, and if they have signs that don't match our sign code, maybe they could take them down before we even get to that point. So we want to make sure that our public engagement plan is aggressive and an intensive level right at adoption. But once it's adopted, we want to make sure that we don't leave this education piece there. We want to make sure that there's follow-up moving forward. So next year and the next year, when we get new businesses in town, they know what our signage standards are too. So we want to come up with a series of targeted pamphlets. So there would be a pamphlet that would say, what are my signage regulations for my home-based business, or what are my signage regulations for my business? And it would be clear examples of what is allowed and what's not allowed in language that's not code language. Also, we would provide notice with our business licenses. Since businesses are required to get a license every year, we can pass along this information to them easily. And with our building permit counter. So when someone comes in to build a new building or do a tenant improvement for an existing structure, we can provide that information as well. Are there any comments on our public engagement plan or other ideas that we should add? Sounds good? Okay. So the other part of this is a fair and equitable enforcement of our code. One of the comments that we hear the most going through this process is that code enforcement makes all the difference in the world. It doesn't matter if you change your code if we don't really enforce it all that well. So we've come up with a multi-departmental approach whereby the code enforcement department would oversee multiple departments, including themselves, and make sure that each of these sub-departments make an effort for code enforcement for signage every week. So code enforcement has dedicated at least 2 hours a week towards processing code violations and seeking new ones and pulling out signs within the right-of-way. The planning department has done the same. Public Works is dedicated at least 2 hours a week. Every Friday they're going to go around town and pull out signs within the right-of-way. And then the building department has dedicated at least 8 hours a week towards code enforcement, which could include signage on private property. And that's something that we weren't enforcing that much before. So it's nice to have building on board as a partner. So for example, if someone put a sign on a private property and didn't get any planning permits, they may have also needed building permits for that structure. We want to make sure that we have, again, that increased initial enforcement, and part of that increased initial enforcement means that someone from the city will go around to all the non-residential neighborhoods and will go property by property and look at those properties and see if they're generally in compliance. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to go trespass and do a tape measure and measure the size of all their signage. We can look and generally kind of see if there's things that look like they don't comply with our code or if they do. And then we'll start to work with those property owners, speaking initially to try and get them to comply with the code before we ever make it to a notice of violation. So we want to talk to them, educate them, talk to them, and then see if they're still out of compliance, then we'll have to go the code enforcement route. And we want to stick to these manageable neighborhoods one section at a time before we move to the next one so that they could pool their resources and understand, we're looking at things in a sequential order. Any questions on our code enforcement plan? No.
So is this at an additional cost for this staffing? Is this additional hours that we approve in the budget, or is this?
This is not. This is not. But if you would like to add additional money, we're willing to take it. So this is what we can do and what we think that will get the job done. So code enforcement's job as an overseer of this will to be make sure that this does get done. And if this is not enough, they'll have to come back to you and tell you, our plan wasn't right, and we'll either need more resources or we'll have to figure out something else.
Right.
The budget committee meeting's coming up.
And Mayor, we're going to be proposing, there is going to be a large staff commitment to the education piece and the implementation phase, but if strict enforcement later becomes a burden, we will be proposing probably a budget amendment or maybe some other corrective action to make sure we have enough resources, because I think the message has been clear to us that the Commission is not only willing to take this on, but willing to take it on in a meaningful way, which means providing funds for enforcement as is needed. And part of this is if we're successful enough in our public outreach and educational piece, we really are hoping that there'll be quite a bit of self-policing going on, and I think this is going to be a culture shift, a lot of it in the business community, but there are people that really, I think, will take pride in, more so even in Oregon City than they have to date, and I believe that it can be done maybe with fewer resources than we anticipate. So we'll be keeping an eye on that.
You mentioned pulling signs out within the right-of-way. Is there some sort of phone call before that's done, or is that just if you see a sign in the right-of-way that does not have a permit, you just pull it out?
So that is a great question. With the signs in the right-of-way, if you choose to move forward with that, we'll have a sticker that will be placed on each sign in the right-of-way that's legal. So we'll easily be able to tell which ones are legal and which ones are not. If it is one of those signs with the metal sticks and it has sort of a plasticky top, sort of one of those, we're probably more likely to just go pull it out of the right-of-way. If it's, say, a more expensive sign right in front of a business and we could see that it's associated with that business, we're going to go knock on that business's door and say, you can't have this, and talk to them first.
And that might take more than 2 hours a week, huh?
Initially, it's going to take a lot of time,
Okay.
but we're committed
There's
to
going to
it.
be quite a bit of upfront, but we hope, once we get a handle on this, it'll be a lot easier
Maintenance.
to enforce.
Yeah.
Once we get to kind of a normal, which is going to take a lot of work, and there's going to be some blowback. There's going to be concerns raised. But on the flip side to that is yes. I mean, signs that are taped to public infrastructure, signs that are stuck in Singer, we're going to yank them. It's obvious that they should not be there, so we're just going to pull them and be done with them.
Do a little
So,
bit of cleanup.
to get to my pet peeve, what is considered right of way? Is the planting strip between the street and the sidewalk in front of a residential house, is that considered public right of way?
Yes, it is.
And so during an election season, would we be pulling election signs out of that, even though the property owners are required to maintain that? And there are some property owners that don't. That's the only place they can put a sign to exercise their First Amendment rights.
They can certainly come in and request a permit to place a sign in the right of way. I don't know how else we do it.
And there's still other options for property owners too. If there's no space, you can, have a wall sign on your wall, or put whatever you want on the inside of your windows without permits, or put signs like this on your private property as well. So there are lots of options, a lot more options than we currently have for signage.
So I apologize for my tardiness tonight here.
It was an excuse to tardy.
Yes. Laura, I was wondering, are we going to be giving this the green light tonight, or this is just a reading of some kind? And before we did the rollout of this, would it be something we'd want to run before a business type organization that might want to look at this and say if there needs to be any adjustments, maybe like OCBA or something like that, or maybe the chamber?
You missed the beginning of the presentation,
Okay, I'm
but this
sorry.
has gone through 38 meetings and
Okay.
all kinds of different stuff. So yeah,
All
I
right.
think
We're almost to 2 years
I
now.
think we fully satisfied the public participation.
Well, we may indeed have an implementation forum, or how to comply, what the new provisions are, something like that, a work session with,
Yeah.
if OCBA and the chamber are willing to jointly host something like that, that could be one of the
Maybe get business
mechanisms
community involved.
that because we really want compliance
Yeah.
more than we want enforcement. And
Well, I
so
think the
it's-
more we do up front, the happier people are going to be here. so.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Regardless of the size of the outreach, there's always going to be
Oh,
people
yeah.
who don't hear it.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so we're getting to. Are you done, Laura?
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'll
I
talk
see
about
Diker to
That's
this.
all right.
There's a few more things. Sorry, there are a lot of items. So next, we have 2 policies that we need to amend. The first is our Historic Review Board policies. We need to add 2 policies to accommodate public art murals if we choose to allow them. They're in your packet. Essentially, public art murals will go through, if they're on an individually designated historic structure in McLaughlin or a building that's more than 50 years old in Kenema, they will go through the Historic Review Board approval as well as our mural approval. There's also a policy for our Public Works Department about banners on street lights and cross-street banners. So we want to make sure that the dimensions are right. We explain our approval process in a clear way, and that's what the purpose of the policy is. Almost done. Proposed fees. Because we're proposing new signage types, we're also proposing new fees to go with it. A bit of explanation here. When you put anything within the public right-of-way, you need a right-of-way permit. Rather than charging a right-of-way permit for each sign, which can be very costly and timely, we have proposed an annual right-of-way permit for signage. So one person would come in, get an annual right-of-way permit for signage, and then they could place as many signs as they want within the right-of-way. For each sign they place in the right-of-way, they would also need a sign permit. Yes?
Would that be for separate, if one person gets a year permit, it can be for separate things, separate events, or separate. Okay.
Yep, so you would get one right-of-way permit, and then I could
Would
have
cover you for that.
a banner, and then an A-frame, and all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
But it's easier for me, so I don't have to get 50 right-of-way permits or something, and cheaper too.
Okay.
So those are our fees associated with it. A lot of our banner fees are based off a study from a public works department by how much time it actually took them to take banners up and pull banners back down. You'll notice one is a lot cheaper, the $65 versus $210, and that's because the location, when they need more equipment and more time to do that than the other. All right, the next thing is murals. If we do allow murals, we had proposed to exempt existing murals. And what I mean by that are wall signs which appear, though we haven't measured, to not comply with our wall sign standard. So we're not looking at the image, we're just looking at the size. So we drove around the city a few times and tried to find every painted wall sign that exceeds our standards and then put them on an exempt list. So regardless of how it was initially constructed, it's exempt. When they want to change the mural or update the mural, then they'll have to go through the mural process.
What was the size?
So wall size now, our current code is you get twice the length of the wall for total signage. So if my wall is 100 feet long, I get 200 square feet of signage on that wall. The Planning Commission encouraged us to come up with ways to incentivize removal of legally nonconforming signs. Our current code says that if it was constructed legally, our proposed draft code says if it was constructed legally, it can stay till the owner takes it down. So the Planning Commission was interested in how do we get some of those owners to take down some of those legally nonconforming signs. You'll see a picture of a billboard because those would be an example of something that would be legally nonconforming under our new code. We've searched the country for different standards and incentives, and basically you can either waive or reduce a permit for a replacement sign or a demolition. Most signs don't need a demolition permit, but you might for, say, a billboard or something like that. Or do a grant or reimbursable cost if someone removes a non-conforming sign. So you can think about that, and then if you want to move forward on any of these, let us know and we can do more work into looking into it.
So, speaking of billboards, how does this affect the existing actual commercial billboards, or does it?
It does affect them. It will allow them to remain until the property owner removes them. Our current sign code says they have to come down.
When the last sign code was adopted, there was a 10-year amortization period that was codified. That pretty much said all signs that don't comply with the code, even if they were constructed legally, had to be removed after 10 years. When 2003 came around, that was not implemented. So we've taken out that amortization period here and just acknowledged that if the sign is legal but non-conforming, it can maintain just like other non-conforming uses in the city. But once it's removed, it is lost.
And obviously, those folks have to maintain the structural integrity
Certainly,
of those things.
yeah. If there becomes a safety issue, that's
so,
different.
and they're allowed to do maintenance, I assume.
Yes.
Okay.
And change copy.
Change of copy.
Well, yeah. Again, content doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
Just the size of the sign.
Can you give me an example of a non-conforming billboard and a conforming one? Is it the location or was it the permit brought?
It's the size that makes it
size?
that makes it non-conforming, so they're all non-conforming.
So on 213 and
I'm kind of attached to billboards myself.
Clackamas River, literally or no? So the billboards right there by Stein Oil, legal non-conforming. The Home Depot sign, even though it's large, it actually complied with our sign code. So you get some idea on just the size difference there.
So it's been a size thing.
And
All right.
there would be no new conform legal billboards because those things that you think of as billboards would be generally too large.
Okay.
Lastly, the Planning Commission asked us to propose to you ways to incentivize well-designed signs. So we have minimum signage standards, and someone could have you could have two separate signs both which comply with our standards, and one might be more aesthetically pleasing than the next. So, how do jurisdictions incentivize a signage type that they would like? So here are options which other jurisdictions have utilized. Grants for a more restrictive standard, again, with content neutrality, so maybe you really like metal signs, and if someone has a metal sign, you give them money or something. Discounted fees for signs, again, which comply with a more restrictive standard, so you either give them money or give them discount on the fee permit. You can do a free specifications for a model signage type, or we can do a pamphlet for inspiration.
What is a more restrictive standard?
Maybe
And
it's
in whose mind is something more aesthetic than someone else's mind?
so. If you choose to go down this path, we have a bit more work to do to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm
we
pretty
don't
sure I'm
know.
not
We don't know
heading
the
down
answer
this
to that.
Mayor, the point I want to make is, first of all, the pamphlet is probably pretty easy for us to develop. The discounted fee is also probably workable for us. We don't have a grant funding source. It's on the list because somebody in some other town did it that had different financial structure than we do. But it's not very realistic for us unless we identify a source for it. But I think there's at least two on there. And when you say you get into the aesthetics, for example, that's what I call a values-based decision, and the model I often use to contrast that is Martha's Vineyard in Las Vegas. Very different sign codes. They fit the values in those communities, but they're drastically different. Martha's Vineyard, monument signs only with wood and underlighting and pretty much wood and stone, I think is what it is. You could probably find places in my home state of Missouri, for example, I call the billboard kingdom of of the country, where metal signs and things that are not terribly tornado resistant are fairly common and fairly dangerous at certain times of the year because of the winds. And it would be universally agreed upon that these are not attractive signs. So there is maybe it'd be hard to identify your most attractive sign, but it wouldn't be that hard to identify the least attractive ones. I think you would find yourselves all pretty quickly recognizing which ones those were. But as Laura mentioned, we would have to do some more work and bring that back. But the idea behind this whole effort for some of the citizens that were involved is a way to make Oregon City look like a better, more appealing place to live and work and visit and invest. So with that in mind, I would encourage you to think maybe broadly about challenging us to do a little bit more work and create something like this, because I think it could be valuable.
Carol?
I do like the incentive there, kind of in the way our grants work to incentivize people to take that extra step. This could, and I think there are measurable things, like you could just say signs without a light box, maybe. Because a lot of those, those light box signs that you see everywhere with the plexiglass, well, anything without that is usually from a company that does custom signs. And so that way you're kind of incentivizing maybe custom signs instead of that typical light box mini mall sign type thing. Because I have seen cities without those, and they really do look a lot different when every sign is more customized. So I think there are measurable things we can do, and I think it's worth looking into, especially if we just have a measurable thing that we can attach it to instead of having to review each thing.
Mr. Smith? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I have a few questions that we probably can cover when we get done with the whole presentation. But on the incentives,
We're done, right?
Look, timing was perfect.
She jumped for you.
oh, good. I have a whole list. No. Okay, so what I'm trying to balance is one of the discussions about the public murals, which is no compensation, but then for signs we can incentivize that, and we can also give money to take things down. So how does the incentives for signs balance with the compensation that's not allowed for murals?
So with the murals, the idea is that if you're going to put a mural up, you can't take money from somebody else to support that particular sign. And so if you're not doing a mural, that prohibition isn't there. So if you're going to go oversize, you're not going to be able to take money. But if you stay within the code, then providing some incentives to take it to a different place, they are consistent.
So, storefront grants, for an example, if a building has a mural on the front of it, and they're repainting their building, and I mean, whether we have murals or not is a question completely separate. But
Right.
let's assume we do allow murals, or we do have existing murals, and a building comes forward and I guess it could even be a Metro Enhancement grant for that matter. Are those something that we can actually use to
Fund murals?
right?
That's actually a good question, and I think the answer is that when you
It depends.
yeah, sorry, I wasn't going to go there. I think the answer is probably in the way in which we look at the term compensation. The more I think about it, the more I think we're going to have some problems doing a grant for a mural if they're
Right.
based on compensation.
So
Yeah.
that worries me in the sense of urban renewal, which
Yeah.
that has come up as a topic for murals that exist on buildings. It has also come up in Metro Enhancement. And then where's the crossover between murals and art? Because we are we've been funding some pieces of art and those kind of things. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
weigh all those.
Let me mention too of course you understand the idea behind the compensation prohibition
Right.
is so that you don't
Right.
turn every building into an
Right.
incentivized billboard.
Right.
So that's going to be contrary to everything you're trying to do with this.
Right.
On the other hand, your question about murals on historic buildings that might be applying for grants, I think the building could certainly, and every other aspect of the building but the
Mural.
mural, thank you, started to say billboard, could qualify, and that would then free up money for the building owner to spend some of that money that they were going to spend on the mural to have other resources to do that with. So I wouldn't let that stop me from adopting this.
Is that it?
I think for now, yeah.
Okay. So I have one general question, and that is, do we have any service stations that signs are currently non-conforming?
Yes.
Yes?
The signs I'm sure that we have situations where there are, multiple, that they exceed the number of signs that are allowed on the property.
But nobody that has their one major sign, like the Chevron at the top of the hill, that sign's appropriately sized for that. I'm just concerned about doing something that's going to cost a business, a lot of money to deal with this.
And our new signage standards will also not change the size for the freestanding signs for businesses. So
if
it
you-
wouldn't even be grandfathered. If they built it legally, it's still legal.
Okay. All right. So let's take your questions one at a time. So question one was?
Would you like to allow signs within the right-of-way?
We'd
With-
be happy to talk about the pros and cons of that.
Under these rules.
Understanding that we have to be content neutral. It's first come, first serve.
So I think there were two questions here, right? One was the content neutrality concerning banners and signs in the right of way. Did we have the ability to regulate that? We don't believe that we have a way that's going to withstand a legal challenge to do that. So knowing that, our banners and flags on, or what do we call them, banners on the light posts, is that something you want to continue?
So I have to ask Bill a question. We can't regulate content at all. So if somebody wanted to put a big FU across the street,
Yeah,
they can do that?
They could do it. Yeah. Yep.
The
And now
one
they know that.
yeah.
They've been able to do that.
They would figure it out, right?
A couple things to think about. The case that started this, Karuk Tribe Indian tribe wanted to do something criticizing PGE on the side of TriMet. And TriMet said, no,
Right.
we don't accept political things. So it wasn't even a big FU. It was something much
Well-
more. And the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court affirmed by an equally divided. So there may be movement sometime in the future. But the court basically said, if you have to read the sign in any fashion to determine whether it's allowed or not, you're violating Article 1, Section 8.
There was this, oh, sorry.
The other piece to think about is, yes, could somebody put up a sign that's a FU or whatever it may be? Yeah. How many the people most likely to do that tend not to be organized and well funded enough to do that. The tougher ones are going to be some political things that might come up, and how do you handle that? Say in September when you start getting elect whoever it may be for mayor, first one in the door gets that sign across the street.
There was an the tram. I remember on the news that the Portland tram, when that went in, someone put a huge sign on the roof of their house.
They
For
painted.
everyone that saw the tram go, and that
Yep.
was a big. I think that's one of the starts of this discussion, and because that was years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and the city of Portland has been in litigation with Clear Channel basically nonstop for the last 20 years about trying to regulate content and billboards, and they've spent millions of dollars
So-
and they've lost every time.
So we can't restrict. So the cross streets and the light poles, we can't restrict those solely to city use.
I believe the city could use them only for public purposes, yes. And it could be only for city use, but we couldn't use it and then deny, we could use it and make it only for city use. But that would be,
But then you put in an advertisement, the city use is the Oregon City Farmers Market.
Main Street.
To own those.
Have to just.
we would own them and they would have to be city sanctioned.
Well, all of those are city-sanctioned events, right? The Oregon City Farmers Market is city-sanctioned, and it takes a permit to close the street and all that sort of thing. The Teddy Bear Festival and the family thing, is that city-sanctioned or not?
There's
No,
no
they're-
definition of
they're
what is
nonprofits.
city sanctioned
They're
and what isn't.
nonprofits.
That's the problem. So,
But if it were public messaging, like, don't forget to vote on November 10th, or,
Well, or like
Don't
this
drink and drive.
don't drink and drive, or
historic downtown Oregon City. That's just a fact.
by the
right?
city,
Yeah.
we can put it up there.
Or something about the parks.
That's right.
We could do
We can-
movies in the
Concerts in the parks.
Right, that type of thing.
I would be
Yes.
probably more towards just limiting the cross street banners and the light poles to just that,
Use.
and that eliminates a lot of hassle.
The concern that we had was just the ownership piece, keeping those signs, cleaning those signs. If it were, say, something like the farmer's market, there was, who's going to maintain it, who's going to repair it when it's done. There's
Probably
there's
not
just-
going to be a lot of city use, is the point John's making. These are going to be reserved for only things that you really think are critically important.
When we
Because it's
tried to walk through this, one of the question that comes up is what happens when an organization donates it to the city? Do we have the ability to accept that donation or reject that donation? And once we accept one, do we have the ability to say no to someone else who donates a sign to us?
reject them all.
I mean, it just it goes.
What do you mean donates a sign? You mean
It's not a city-sanctioned event, so they donate the sign to the city, so that the city has ownership
no?
of
The
the sign.
regular. What I'm anticipating is if it's not a city-sanctioned event, that's it.
Okay, I think we need to do
You
some
can
work
give us a
then
bunch
to
of
try
signs, and we'll put them in the back room somewhere.
Well, like the downtown example was one of those where, if they wanted to give, Main Street wanted to give those signs over to the city, then, would that be treated different than the farmer's market?
And, what about things like the hospital running events? I mean, there must be a lot of people that use those, not a lot, but a handful or a dozen different signs that go up there.
Well, that's why I was hoping it could just be applied to nonprofits, where you can say nonprofits can, but you say we can't do that.
Well,
Remember the contents.
The other question I had was, if we tried this policy and waited until that first problematic sign came up, could we then make the decision?
Yeah. You know,
So Carol's question is a good one. We're not talking about content, we're talking
Regulating
about
ownership
the,
or-
the organization. So if we say only nonprofits can use those signs, would that,
It's too broad.
my initial reaction is sort of a really hesitant, maybe. But you know, it's would a court say what you're doing is content-based regulation under a different name? You know, and you know, it's one of those. It's a trick that only a lawyer could love. And you know, my thought is that, sort of as John was saying, have a policy, and the likelihood of somebody coming in with something isn't, you know, deal with it when they come in. But you know, the more you edge towards content neutrality, the more you're buying yourself a lawsuit at some point.
I can tell you from experience that I'll give you another example, a Southern Oregon example. We had an annual parade in the city, and a guy who was a little bit of a notorious fellow bought a building in our downtown and opened a strip club in the downtown. And we developed, the city commission developed it was a city council, developed an ordinance that you couldn't have one of these establishments within so many feet of a park. And we just happened to have a piece of land that was scheduled to build a park, but the park wasn't built yet, and we got the park built in 24 hours. Right before the application came in, we were clear with the applicant. We told him before we bought the building, we know you want to build a strip club here. We're telling you up front. We're going to put it in the newspaper. We called him up. We sent him a certified letter saying we are building a park here. It was a long legal battle. Well, at the end of the 20-some complaints that were filed in federal court, they were all ultimately dismissed in the city's favor. However, in the intermeeting months of that litigation, there was this large parade for our Christmas party, and there was a float entered. And on the float had some particular kind of costumes and ladies on
Or
the
lack
float.
thereof.
Yes. And I can remember standing there with the mayor watching the parade, and little kids and parents literally stunned because there was nothing the city could. I mean, people were yelling at the police were there. It was a community-wide. So when you say there's a triggering event for cities, and maybe we should wait, I just want to make sure you really know what that feels like, because my phone, I bet I had 100 phone calls that day. And I know the commission president and the mayor had equal numbers. And so that was the wake-up call for our city that maybe we need to have, we can't regulate content in these parades. So are we going to have these parades? And are we going to regulate how many floats? I'm not trying to scare you. I just want you to realize that whether it's a nonprofit or whatever it is, when you say you can't regulate content, it is a very open palette. And it really only matters when you get someone that's unreasonable. And we don't have a lot of unreasonable people in Oregon City, but this person
All it takes
wasn't
is
from
one.
our city. He was somebody who came and wanted to get publicity for his business, and he certainly got a lot of publicity.
gee, that hasn't happened lately.
So I just want you to have eyes wide open, you know, I mean, it's a tough call.
So what is staff recommending on this item?
Well,
They're asking us.
So, under
We had recommended a new banner policy that laid out how they could be put up there, the duration. But then the question was raised by the commission at the last work session concerning the content question. And so we received quite a bit of feedback through the process from some of the business organizations that they wanted to be able to put up banners and utilize the infrastructure for advertisement. So that's what came out of the CAT.
yeah. So,
So
during
the
our
question that I have is, what is the, so for the cross street banners and the banners on the light poles, what is the time frame that they're allowed to be there if they buy the permit?
So someone could put up a sign for 30 days or a month at a time, and you can't reserve, the same applicant can't reserve the same slot twice in a row. So you have to wait, and you can't reserve it more than 3 times per year For the cross street banners, there's 2 locations, and then for the signs on the light pole, we divided the city into 4 zones, and so you can reserve a zone at a time. Again, you can't have repeats.
For how long?
A month at a time, and you can't submit an application too early, so you can't come in on January 1st and say, I want them all for the whole year. You sort of have to wait until 2 weeks before the event. 2 months to 2 weeks before the event is when you're going to install the signs.
Okay.
When we accept it.
Well, that's kind of expensive for businesses too, to print those signs and not know if they're gonna get the permit slot. Like, let's say Main Street's doing it and they, summer festival, and they won't even know if they're gonna get the slot at 2 weeks because something else.
Correct, because it's first come, first served. So the first one in the door for that requested time would get it.
Prior planning prevents poor performance.
This is why so many cities don't take on sign codes. And they are very hard to change. It's kind of like Congress taking on Social Security. So you have kudos, I think, for having the courage to take this on, but there aren't very many clear-cut answers because it does reflect your community values. And also now with these content-neutral rulings, a certain amount of your tolerance for risk. And
Bill, let's just say 2 weeks before an event, we got an obscene sign. Could the commission vacate their ordinance allowing signs?
I believe they could. I think it, depending on the circumstances, could well lead to a lawsuit.
Well, yeah, we would get sued because you're talking about vacating and then putting it back in place 2 weeks later.
No.
No, not putting it back in.
No,
That would guarantee a
people that are
lawsuit, I think. It's sort of saying, you know what, we've had enough of cross-street signs. We're going to make a considered decision to eliminate banners at this point.
So
But anyone
it's-
who's on the schedule would
Get
could
refund. They get refunded their
Yeah.
money, and they say, "It's too bad. Sorry."
maybe.
So the banners have to get lumped with or the street sign, the ones on the light poles have to get lumped with the cross street.
No, I don't think so.
They're just together in the policy.
Because they're right-of-way signs.
Because they're in the public right of way.
so you could allow some of those, for example, but not all of them. So you could allow A-frames and banners, but not cross-street banners, or vice versa, any combination of those.
Let's also think about the fact that the nature of the content neutrality means also a business owner, if they wanted to put up a sign, whatever it may be, the exact same things that are you're causing problems, they can do that at the private business, use their sign limits to do that as well, and we don't have control over that.
So in LO, they had an issue. Is they can put anything inside against the glass, and that is not considered a sign?
It is not covered under our sign code, correct. We exempt stuff inside of a structure.
Well, I think that's something we need to look at too. Because if you just take, that's a way around the code. If you have 2 great big giant 12 by 12 windows, and the way you're going to get somebody's attention, you paint it on the inside, that's still a sign.
Can you
or a
regulate?
mural.
It's private property.
That's
though.
private property.
So I don't see.
It's still a sign. It's no different than the sign being outside on the outside of the wall. That's private property too.
Could we make a note of that and maybe get through we can come back and revisit that, because that one we've historically not regulated signs inside a building, whether that be the fluorescent open sign or the sign that flashes open because we didn't allow flashing signs. So I guess if that's something that the commission would like to do, we'd request a little time to go back and look into that a little bit, because we're not prepared to tackle that one right now.
Yeah, I think
So,
it ties in.
I have
I was
something.
just thinking. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Painting windows. Right, so there you have murals. Basically, you just put in a big window, paint a mural inside it.
So on the outside, you would need a sign permit for a wall sign, and the inside, nothing.
Right.
But that's probably not very likely to happen, given the expense of having a big glass window and the other opportunities that would be competing for that space. I mean, it's probably not going to be something you see a lot of. But keep in mind, this is our work session, so we want to try to see how much consensus there is for these different questions that need to be answered, so that we know what to do with our time in the future.
So your first question was, again, should we allow signs within the right-of-way?
Right, and I was,
I think the general consensus I get is yes, with some,
Reservations.
some things that we're going to have to talk about. So we'll move on to question 2.
It seems like Commissioner Pauly's trying to.
Oh,
Are you trying to speak on this?
yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was basically just going to come back around and say the same thing. So the question is, should we allow signs within the right of way? And they're there anyway. The sandwich boards, I think specifically because we can only have 2 cross the street banners, and then we have a certain amount of light poles. So I think the real question is the sandwich boards. They're there anyway. So this could reduce them. It would reduce them and hold people more accountable. So I think that on this question, I think that's really gets to the bottom of it. Is this a sandwich board thing?
and nobody really had any question about the sandwich boards, right? We all looked at that.
Well, they're already there.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as the
This
way
would regulate
the
it.
way they're being regulated
Right.
now.
So I think the question with the sandwich
many?
boards was, we were allowing 1 per frontage, right? And so what we've come back with is 1 per frontage throughout the city. But the restriction there is going to be the width of your sidewalk. If you may recall, we had to keep 4 feet is that right? 4 foot for ADA clearance. So if your sidewalk's only 5 foot wide, you can have a 1 foot A-frame. If you have a 2 foot, we're not going to permit it because we won't have 4 foot of clearance in the public right of way. So in many parts of the city, that's going to be a limiting factor. So then the question became, what do you do when you have multiple tenants within 1 building, 1 tax lot? So what we proposed is in the mixed use downtown in the Willamette Falls district, so everything pretty much below the bluff, we would allow up to 3 A-frames per frontage based on the number of public entryways into a building. Now, if 4 businesses are accessed off the same public entrance, that's still 1 public entrance. It needs to be operable. So that was an idea that we came up with looking at others. So I think that was one of the questions that you'd asked us to look at the last work session. So any questions, concerns, or other ideas on that?
So it seems like the question then has been resolved on sandwich boards, but we're back to the banners, both on poles and over cross streets.
I think we have general consensus that we move forward with the cross street banners and the banners on light poles, kind of the way it's sitting right now.
Mayor, do you mean as proposed by staff?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I would go along with that, with the caveat that if at some time there was a problem, that we would have to take a look at the whole thing and change it maybe then. You'll have to change your ordinance then. Is that what you'd have to do?
Yes.
Yes, but we aren't going to implement and adopt this ordinance on a conditional approval. I mean, we need approval, and then if there's a problem, then
But at any time
our phones
we could go
will light up, and
at,
then we
at
will.
any time we would have the opportunity to say, okay, we're done with cross street banners. We're taking them down. We're never putting them up again.
Yeah, and when you do that, it's a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, it's one
Response.
size fits all.
Yeah.
So pragmatically thinking, we haven't had a whole lot of problems in the past, so I'm
Right.
going to be,
Right.
Okay. So question 2 is murals, right?
Yes. Would we like to allow murals?
Okay, so I'm just going to say where I am, and then you guys can all talk. I'm at the point of saying we have these ones that exist, and we allow them to remain and to be maintained, which means, at least to my mind, if it starts to fade, they could retouch up or do whatever it is to keep the mural fresh, but that we not allow any other murals in the city. Because I don't have I just don't have the confidence. I mean, a sign is one thing. You could take a sign down, but if somebody... Art is a funny thing. And some people can do some really gross stuff that they call art. And I don't want to have one of those on the side of one of our buildings for 5 years.
So, yeah.
That's all I got to say.
They could, so existing murals that are on that list, if they are repainted, that's okay?
Yes. The grandfather.
Maintained.
But not repainted and changed. I mean, they repainted as the way they are.
Right.
Touched up.
I would even take that definition so far as to say that if something happened and there was an act of God, a windstorm, whatever, that you could repaint the exact same thing, but it can't change any more than humanly possible.
Is that
Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I want to make sure and that matches generally what we have in the policy, or what is the current ordinance saying?
So the current ordinance says you can have new
Proposed
murals, but for the existing ones which are exempt, when they redo the image, it has to go through the approval process. They can't repaint the image. They can maintain the sign as is.
But we could put in the code that as long as the image is exactly the same, they can renew or maintain that image.
I think that's what she's saying, is that you can maintain the current image. Is that correct?
And maintain.
Right. And so the question is, if they want to change it, the way the code is currently set up, you go through the process. But you're suggesting that
If they want to change it, then it's over. That it becomes a white wall.
Yeah, we can come up with language for you.
If that's what.
I guess where is everybody else?
Daphne?
So my concern isn't on tasteful or untasteful art. It's that they could really be billboards, couldn't they? Mm-hmm. You could have a whole city full of building advertisements.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what we were trying to prevent with the sign code in the first place.
right?
It would need to go through the art committee. It would need to be.
The what committee?
There is no art.
There is no arts commission. That was
That's
another
the
thing
problem.
that was in your language
Yeah.
board.
So
Yeah.
the process defers to an arts commission, which is identified in Title II of our code, or its designee. So we would be requesting that the planning commission be acting
planning
as their
commission then.
designee for this purpose.
So what's the
until-
arts commission supposed to do?
There is no
We
arts
don't have an
commission.
arts
No, but
So under
let's
the
let's
ordinance.
make it imaginary that we have an arts commission. What are they supposed to do?
So there are criteria for murals. So
Retouch up murals.
for murals specifically, they would look at those review criteria and make sure that the proposal meets that, and then they would grant new murals.
But be content neutral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that pretty much takes the art out of it.
The planning
Now it's
commission.
just interpreting code.
Yeah, the planning commission suggested that we add the word art in public murals to encourage art murals. But other than that, we are not looking at the content.
I mean, this is it's a horrible topic because it's sad in a way that we, could easily lose one of the things that's makes Oregon City, downtown Oregon City. But I agree. I mean, that we don't have much of a choice. I guess the concern that I think this applies to art too downtown. So we've spent a lot of money on art in Oregon City in the last few years. And that's the same thing. So are we going to now say no art downtown? I find that hard to believe.
Well,
but we almost have to.
So is Moonscape a sign?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's art or a mural or a sign. It's the same thing.
No, but that was an actual question.
Yeah.
Is Moonscape a sign?
And I'm going to turn to Tony and Laura because I don't have the definition in front of me of what we say a sign is. And
Right.
so
It's very broad. Would you like me to read it? It
Unfortunately.
includes all painted things, anything that, let's see.
But art does not fall under the sign code, though.
But what is art?
So, a sign means any sign, display message, emblem, figure, painting, drawing, placard, poster, billboard, carving, or other thing that is designed, used, or intended to convey a message or image and is used to inform or attract the attention of the public. And the term includes the sign structure, display surface,
Okay.
and all other components. So it's pretty broad.
So Moonscape is a sign.
It could be read that way.
I know it is that way.
I know.
If you're taking that.
Well, that's my
language.
point. I think all
So
the
my
art
question is that too big? The city owns it, right?
Remind me what Moonscape is?
At the
Yeah,
end
on
of
the bottom
8th
of
Street,
Singer Falls.
below the falls, that metal thing that
Oh.
looks like
It's in the right of
Chinese
way.
lettering or something?
Yeah, so all signs in the right-of-way are currently, so they're exempt under our sign code right now. And so are all government-owned signs right now. So in the proposed code, government-owned signs will not be exempt, but they are currently. And so it's exempt under both of those. It's a right-of-way sign, which is currently exempt, and it's a government sign, which is currently exempt.
So could we not exempt ourselves from the sign code in order to deal with the art thing?
We could.
And
so,
why not
Very
murals
good.
then?
So part of the
Because we
public.
don't own the, because we don't own the murals. Those are on private property. We assume that any public art we're going to do is going to be on public property,
Right, but
right?
the city could do murals on its own property, and that would be perfectly fine.
The city could continue to exempt government-owned and maintained signs like we currently do through our public involvement process. The public suggested that we.
Hold on, we're saying government
No.
or city?
Government.
Can we say city rather than government?
You can say city
Yeah.
government.
Could we do zones too, like maybe allowing murals in the historic areas and do it zoned?
But you're back to content, Carol.
Right.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the Railroad Avenue wall because
But they have historic review board though that they have to go through.
But they can't regulate content either. So we're going to have a bunch of naked Native Americans?
so
That's art?
I wanted to mention, Mayor, that I know Commissioner Pauly's talked to me before about the Railroad Avenue wall down there. And some of you have as well. And Mr. Lewis was showing me just now a tile embedded rendering on a wall that he saw that's actually delightful looking way to enhance that. And so I think we need to be careful. I just want to make sure we're not foreclosing opportunities there that might exist in the future on that particular piece. And I don't know if that means we exempt city government from those kinds of things or not. But
I think people, I think the people would understand us exempting ourselves from this piece of the code for that purpose.
it would be for public benefit. That's what it
That's
would need
correct.
to be for.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm assuming that we're not going to put up something that's obscene or offensive, at least not while
think that's
this
a
commission
correct-
is up here.
That's a correct assumption.
Are we
So,
clear as mud?
so did I hear that we want to put back just city,
Yes.
not government?
Correct.
In general, city-owned signs are exempt.
And they would only be on city-owned property then?
Well, let me make sure I clarify this. Are there any downsides that either of you can think of to the city exempting city government from, as we do currently? Do you see any
The
downsides?
issue that was brought up was equity. Why should the city not have to go get a sign permit just like any other private business? That was the argument that was brought forward.
Well,
Yeah.
I get that.
That
But,
was the argument.
you know, my balance is, do we want to stop having art altogether? And I think the answer is no, even though I'm not the biggest, but
Mayor,
I think generally speaking.
another potential response that's similar is that these city-owned facilities are in public right-of-way that's managed by the city for the public's benefit,
Right.
all of the public,
Right.
including our government guests here that are non-city government that are part of our community and an important part. So we're entrusted or obligated, however you want to characterize it. Some days it's an obligation, other days it's an opportunity, but we do have that responsibility to manage public rights-of-way. So to me, Railroad Avenue is one of those examples of
Right.
trying
Which
to...
was the same thing with the art project that we did on the elevator. The elevator is a vertical right-of-way.
Right.
Yep.
But so just to be clear, right now, what the new code is going to say is that government-owned signs within the right-of-way. Obviously, other government agencies need to put their signage in the right-of-way, traffic control signs, etc. Government-owned signs within government-designated parks, metro-designated open space, and at stormwater facilities. So we propose to keep those two and then add an additional exemption that specifically addresses city government. City of Oregon City, we'll work on that language, but what I'm hearing is the City of Oregon City is exempt from the sign code.
Yes.
Regardless of where it's located.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think did we get to the point where I think we're all in agreement that we're just going to keep the murals that we have and allow them to be maintained, and we're not going to have any more murals. We're not voting here. I'm just, okay. So,
Consensus.
then we'll have an opportunity when this comes up in the public session to have a discussion and let the public comment and do whatever. And if we find that someone brings a compelling argument, then we can make an adjustment.
And Mayor, just so we don't, because we don't want to shock people and, make them, we are trying to, I think I see the commission struggling to protect and enhance art while at the same time managing this resource. And I want to say that when you say no murals, keep in mind that some would call a tile mosaic on a Railroad Avenue a mural. So no new murals as we traditionally perceive them on private buildings, but that doesn't mean there
But the
couldn't
city's
be.
exempt from the sign code.
Exactly.
Right. So we
but
can
that's
do
the
that.
point. So there could be a mural on a public building at some point. That's
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
But that would come directly under the purview of the city manager and the city commission.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And we could regulate that content
Yes.
because we're doing it.
Yep.
Okay.
And if there were to be something down at the river walk, like murals or pictures or a walkthrough, then that's in.
And I think that's
Public
really
right
important
away,
that
too.
you don't
If
draw
it's
the
city
line.
owned.
Yes.
It's not. It's
If the art is city owned.
Well,
The
hold
art
on.
is city owned.
Here's a
If the art is
question.
city owned.
Let's, as my mother's fond of saying, cross that bridge when we get there. So let's go with what we have now. Were you okay with that? Question 3 is.
You've answered all of. It was if we allow signs in the right of way. If so, how many A-frames on the ground, and should we allow murals? So it sounds like you've answered all
Okay,
three.
good, because we have 12 minutes left and we have one more thing to do. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We'll see you on April 1st when we come back before you go to public hearing.
April 1st, huh?
April 1st.
Oh, we have 2
Oh,
over
goodness.
here.
Yeah.
So we have 2 items, actually.
First one's easy.
Draft amendments to the Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 2.30, Citizen Involvement Committee. The staff person is Mr. Conkle.
Thank you, Mayor. So Commissioner Shaw, Mayor Holliday, we're at the last Citizen Involvement Committee meeting where we introduced the proposed amendments adding the CIC to the Oregon City Municipal Code. There were several concerns and questions raised during that meeting, so we were hoping it would go a little more smoothly than it did, and we were hoping to have some new code potential in front of you tonight. We are requesting additional time to go back and address the concerns and questions raised by the CIC, and then bring that back to the City Commission in a work session once we've been able to address those concerns that have been raised.
Anybody have a problem with that?
No.
Okay,
I
moving
watched
on.
the tape.
3D 15-149, adjustments to the City Commission Rules of Procedure and review of commission policies.
That's me.
Ms. Riggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I brought before you your rules of procedure, and there are a couple of adjustments or additions to it. So we'll start with that, and the adjustments, starting with the first one, is under Section 2, your general rules. Under E, the minutes of the meeting. On number 4A, it says a sound recording shall be made at each meeting. We would like to remove the word sound and just have it say recording shall be made at each meeting.
Okay.
The second change on there is under Section 3, types of meetings. In Section A, regular meetings, we've added the sentence that says, all regular meetings will be adjourned no later than 10 p.m. unless extended until no later than 11 p.m. is agreed upon by the consensus of the commission present at that meeting.
No, that's not what we talked about. By a unanimous vote of the commissioners present.
Okay. Perfect. We will make that change.
Is that? I mean, that's what we had talked about in the goal setting
Works to me.
session.
Unanimous. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll make that change. And then the next one is in the same section, number E, the retreat. Since we have a biennial budget now. We do the goals setting retreat every 2 years, so we've changed that to be in the odd years.
Can
What
can I
page
speak
number?
on that one?
That was on.
Okay, thank you.
Daphne, go ahead.
It's not on when, but you had the meeting location. Did the meeting location in the minutes say to have it within the city? Because that's what I would like to see in there, that the meeting would be within Oregon City limits, and the efforts of transparency and having people being able to attend our retreat. I get that the retreat is a time that we work together, but there's still the public should be there. And I enjoyed the facility last year out in the country, but I think it needs to be in the city limits. There's something else in there that tied in with that it should be in the city. So that's just my 2 cents.
Does staff have any input on that?
Saying things should be available, close by, easy to get to.
Well, that's all true. I mean, the purpose of your retreat isn't really to retreat from the public and get away from people. But it is to get you out of the chambers here where you're used to deliberating, and you could restrict the circumference around the city, but to say in the city limits does limit our opportunities to negotiate prices for use of facilities, and also limits our ability to use some facilities that some of you would probably consider to be part of the community, but not necessarily in the city limits. So you may want to just put a restriction on that and say within 5 miles of the corporate limits or something like that.
Well, I think that we also, there's more than that. I think that we talk the talk on supporting our local businesses. So that's my feeling is that it would be within city limits. There are multiple places. I don't know what it would cost, but we have park space, if nothing else. We have the Pioneer Center. And I get it, the atmosphere is different when you go to a retreat. I get that. But I'm just saying, we're a public organization. And
Anybody else have any feelings on that?
I agree with Daphne.
I'm all for it.
I think people should
That's
be able
fine.
to get on the bus and come if they need to, and not have it so that they can't get there if they want to come.
And I think she's right, and it will continue to get better, that we're going to have more and more spaces where we can. I mean, that group was not all that large to start with. What do we have, 20, 25 of us there?
And I actually think most of them have been in the corporate limits. So it's not like we don't have
Right.
some other options.
Anyway,
it's just a small thing.
I think we have consensus on that. Okay.
Sounds good. And then moving to the next one is section 9. It's the conduct of the quasi-judicial land use hearings, section A, and it's at the very end, the timetables, number 10, for the public hearing process for land use items. We added in recognized Oregon City neighborhood associations and public government agencies or other incorporated public interest organizations from Oregon City. So they're Oregon City recognized organizations. Tongue twister. Is that a consensus there, or?
Was there how did the hamlet fit in that?
What hamlet?
The hamlet of Beaver Creek.
We don't have any hamlets in Oregon City.
Or any CPOs.
I think you answered it. But
So is there any other discussion on that? I want to get everybody's opinion on that and make sure that's what you want to do.
well, the only reason I asked because I know our former mayor Doug Neely and the commission in the past has, I think, made it available for the hamlet to come.
Well, the
speak,
hamlets
but
can come speak
just
as
as
individuals. Yeah.
I don't remember what the difference in time was. Was it?
Well, they would get 3 minutes versus currently they get 5.
Okay.
Anything else? Commissioner Shaw?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
Okay. So that's all the changes on the rules of procedure. The next item, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the draft proclamation policy, the commission policy that we've been asked to bring forward a draft proclamation dealing with requests of proclamations to the city staff or commission or the mayor. And it's a pretty broad policy, but we're open for discussion on that. If you have any suggestions or changes.
So basically, it was mayor approval and a 30-day notice to get on the agenda, right?
So this is a new policy or an
This would
amendment?
be
No,
a
this is
new-
brand new policy.
Brand new
Yeah.
policy.
Currently
would be a
have
brand
any
new policy.
Okay.
whatsoever. on
And
proclamation.
local, how was it worded, local?
It'd be sponsored by a commissioner, I believe. Yeah, and it's for local,
Subject to relate to components of the Oregon Comprehensive Master Plan Commission goals or that have provision of municipal city businesses located in Oregon City, Philadelphia. Yeah.
basically has some sort of ties to
What
Oregon
this
City.
does,
If there's-
what this is intended to do is to give me, and by extension you guys, the ability to say no with a set of guidelines. So that, you know, I mean, I got a request from some guy down in California talking about the, I don't know, Oregon California trails, something or other, and when I talked to him, he was not very coherent. So it's just a matter of, you know, we want to, one, these things take time in our meetings, and so this just gives us the ability to have a way to say that's, you know, outside of the scope of what we issue proclamations for.
Did you say it was 30 days, Dan? They have 30 days to apply?
I didn't
I think
see.
there's a 30-day.
Is it just, we don't have a deadline?
No, there's not a deadline. We ask that they submit their information like 30 days in advance of the meeting so that we have time to, you know, review it and approve it.
And to me, that sounds reasonable too. It shouldn't be all these walk-on items at the nth hour
Yeah.
here,
Right.
which is what it easily can be.
Well, it does allow us to control our time here, so, and I think the guidelines are correct on this.
So, Mr. Fraser, in the rest of these, is there anything that is really pressing that we talk about tonight in the rest of this list?
The rest of your agenda items tonight?
Yes.
I just have a short report to make.
No, I'm talking about there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9
No,
more.
they're just if you had any, they're just for review. Wanted you to be aware of them. They are commission policies. The main things are the travel reimbursement and the electronic devices. You know that even using your personal devices for any city business, you're subject to, those are subject to disclosure.
Okay.
That's the only.
None of those have changed. Those are all the
Nope,
same.
those are all the same. These
Okay.
are the only changes.
Okay. So we can either bring them back at another work session, or we can just say okie dokie right now, and they can bring it back, and we can officially adopt them in another commission.
Mayor, we
meeting.
would just put it on the consent agenda for your next
Right.
meeting.
Okay. So if anybody in reviewing of these has something else, you know,
Well-
let's get it out there in email
Really
form.
quick, so before, at one point, we talked about commission reports not being at the end of the meeting, and so that, the way this is in here is that they would continue to be at the end of the meeting.
What do you mean commission reports?
Well,
not being at
each
the
of
end?
us, all the meetings we go to, so is that the way you would?
No, I
that-
thought we agreed that's the way it was going to be.
Same as it has been.
Okay, same as it has been?
Yeah.
I misunderstood. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple things. I think I would like to ask Chief Band to give you an update on how it's been going out there with his public information campaign regarding the C-Safe initiative.
Good evening. Does feel like a campaign. Since we last talked, I I've been out in the community giving the same message to everybody, just kind of in review that part of our plan was after the goal session to be out and presenting the kind of the background of the building, the need for the building, the purchase of the school, the site design, and then the last thing is our proposed solution for funding this. The recent meetings I've been to, I got to read the Optimist Creed this morning. I was at the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, Knieben Neighborhood Association, and Alliance. The feedback is pretty much the same at every meeting I go to. Universally, people like the fairness of the piece, of the fee, and the idea that it is not just put on the backs of property owners. I'm getting a consensus that people like the idea of the 15-year versus the 20-year fee, just because of the savings at only $1 extra a month. A couple comments have been made about, the timeline that we've given was that we would start collecting this fee, wait a couple years, and something that has been brought up is whether or not waiting 2 years would have an advantage because of potential bond rates going up. The most universal thing is that there would be something concrete from the mayor and commission that this fee would sunset when it was over. That is the most resounding thing that I hear. The other thing is that they want to make sure that any money coming from this, that there's no side pool, that the money goes directly to what it's being said that it would pay for. They really like the plan, the proposed plan of the site, and they like the openness of the process that we're doing so far. We're going to continue hitting a bunch of neighborhoods. I've got Rivercrest, Hillendale, and Gaffney, and I will keep bringing you back their feedback. And ultimately, the next 2 more dates, and I'm done. On March 31st, for anybody that we're not able to hit, or for somebody who finds out that it was at their neighborhood association and they were not able to attend, we're having an open house at the police department that starts at 6:30 p.m. And we're going to just go a little more in depth into all the things that I just mentioned, and also
could you mention that date again?
March 31st.
Okay.
At 6:30 p.m. And then our plan is on May 6th to be bringing this to you at a commission meeting for adoption.
Awesome.
That's all I've got.
Okay, so I want to answer that one question because I think it's important that the city as a whole has already established. Because one of the things that when I worked on the Blue Ribbon Commission for the fire service, and when we changed over, we made a commitment that we wouldn't take that extra money and use it within we wouldn't touch anything for 5 years. And in fact, we still have a piece of our taxable revenue that we could take that we are not taking currently.
Correct.
So that's one of the things that we can use in this discussion is the fact that not only will the city commission and certainly me say that as long as I'm mayor, I would oppose any kind of way of making that go longer, but I think the rest of the commission would as well. And once a commission makes that statement and does it over again, as the structure of the commission changes, there's a real institutional pressure. I mean, if we got to 10 years and somebody wanted to try to do something different, I think it would come crashing down on them like a ton of bricks. So we did what we said we would do, and then we're going to do what we say we would do again.
Is that's
it? Thank you.
Next, I don't know if any of you received this letter from Water Environment Services, but we will make sure, Katie, can we make sure we get a copy of this out to them tomorrow? It's a letter from Wes, and it's inviting the city to participate in a regional wastewater treatment capacity advisory committee. So I just want to make a little bit of a correction to the implication in the first paragraph that says the advisory committees of Tri-City Service District and Clackamas County Service District 1 recently determined significant decisions must be made regarding investments in shared treatment capacity. I'm on the Tri-City Advisory Committee board. We did not take a vote on that committee on the formation of it. Commissioner Savas didn't used to come to advisory committee meetings. They used to be just pretty much attended by West staff and the 3 city managers from the cities. But about a year ago, he started attending and talking about this idea of having even a bigger regional. And here's the situation I see: is it's much like the Board of County Commissioners now has a really big challenge in front of them, because on the one hand you have CCSD1, and the other hand you have Tri-City, and these districts have competing interests in the same facility, and they're represented by the same people signing the same agreements. And as you know, that means that somebody, one group or the other, generally isn't going to have 100% of their interest accounted for. And we have seen that in reviewing the last couple of agreements between CCSD1 and Tri-City. It does look like CCSD1 is getting a little bit better terms and conditions in these agreements, and Tri-City is not getting as much. Now, CCSD1 is also paying higher rates, so they may say, well, we're paying higher rates. So I'm sure there's plenty of argument on both sides, but the reality is, if you're an attorney representing 2 sides in a transaction, both sides are not getting the best deal they could get. And that is the reality. No matter how many committees we have, we won't be able to change that until we address the governance structure. But I believe the mayor is that it's actually asking me to designate somebody, a representative, and that has traditionally, this would be the role of the mayor. They are asking us for an alternate, and they are suggesting an alternate be an elected official, but I also want to throw out there that I've asked John Lewis if he would be an alternate in case some of you didn't want to be. And the only reason I'm saying that for John, this entangled relationship at this agency is very difficult to understand, as all of you know. And I'm suggesting that John is going to be at those meetings anyway with the mayor, so that he isn't there hearing technical information that isn't that's difficult to challenge. I will also say one of the frustrations as a Tri-City Committee member is that when it's fully staffed by county employees, and then there's 4 of us on that committee, one of them being a county West director. You have an even number of people, so that vote is kind of difficult sometimes. But it's also heavily, it looks to me like that you can simply present, Bill and I know this, you can simply present the information you want to lead to the conclusion that you want to come out based on what you put in. And it's been frustrating there trying to have complete open transparency, because it is often the result is ordained in advance, and simply the information provided only gets you to that one place. It isn't, would you like billboards or this or that? We try to keep it open here. We don't always do it, but we try.
You just raised a point in my head that I had not really sunk in until right this second. But on South Fork, John Collins doesn't have a vote.
Exactly.
At the Tri-City, or at Oak Lodge,
right
there, Dan Bradley doesn't have a vote.
Right.
So why does the director of West have a vote on the Tri-City Advisory Board? It should just be the 3 cities.
And when an elected official, a high-ranking elected official shows up, it does change the conversation. I've noticed their staff,
really?
Everybody acts different.
Of course they
yes,
do.
And the other thing I will mention now that we're on the roll here.
You got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Also, the West director controls what goes on the agenda.
Right.
So this would be akin to me voting with you and me setting the agenda instead of the mayor. So you can see this would pretty quickly become a staff-driven organization if we did things like that. And this is just some of the things that are coming out in the broader discussion about House Bill 2800 and why we're trying to do something about it. Anyway, that's up there for your consideration. Again, I would propose John Lewis be the alternate, but that would be your decision. And please let me know how any of you feel about that, because I want to get John while he's still willing.
So,
and then last but not least, I've been asked to participate on the interviews tomorrow for the new West director. And I was really on the fence about this, because I don't want to hear these words that I've heard sometimes referred to the Tri-City Advisory Committee. Well, the committee voted for these rates. That's a place I see the Board of County Commissioners often going, well, this particular committee member hasn't been voting for all those rate increases, but they characterize it that way. So I was afraid that if I don't participate, and as requested in the interviews, that it would be not having a chance to influence the outcome. I do think the questions are probably going to be pretty well mapped out already, so there may not be a whole lot of influence there. But I want to be participating as much as I can to be helpful. And if there's any flexibility in asking questions, I'll be creative and professional at the same time in doing that. And so I'm going to go, and wish me well. That's the